So now let's look at the story of Mr. and Mrs. Seller. You've probably actually heard the story before. Mr. and Mrs. Seller listed their property on the market. In this instance, it was a list price of $500,000. Very excited, first open home. The agent gives them a call afterwards and said, great news, I've already got an offer on your property, $480,000. Now, Mr. and Mrs. Seller were umming and ahhing about the $480,000, but in the end made a decision not to accept the offer. They thought the property's just come on the market, that if they give it a little bit more time and the opportunity of maybe attracting a few more buyers through the property, they should be able to achieve a higher offer. The fact that 480 was 20,000 short of their hope price of 500,000 meant that, you know, it'd probably be a better idea to hold off to see if we could get a bit more. A few more weeks on the market. At this point, no further offer higher than 480,000. The buyer that offered 480 had actually moved on now and purchased another property. So they were at a point with inquiry levels had started to dry up. Inspections on the property had slowed right down, and the agent said to them at this point his suggestion to try and increase the inquiry and increase the inspection on the property. They had probably no other choice other than to readjust the list price. His suggestion was to list it at $480,000. Not really wanting to, but understanding that they needed the best way for them to get the sale was to get more buyers through the property. They agreed to list for $480,000. Ran a few more open homes. Again, not much more interest in the property. No further offers on the property. The agent said again, at this point it looks like we still might be priced a little bit too high to attract the right buyers through the property. My suggestion is that we drop again another $20,000 with a list price of $460,000. It did the job, and at the next open home, this is a couple of months now into the campaign, they actually got some more inquiry and interest on the property and ended up achieving or getting an offer of $430,000 on the property. Now, keeping in mind this is $50,000 tax-free, less than what they had offered in the very first week of the campaign. But motivated to sell and wanting to move forward, they ended up accepting the $430,000. Now, unfortunately, this is $50,000 less than what they could have sold the home for in the very first week of the campaign. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to look at the 5 rules of buyer behaviour. These rules are going to discuss how buyers behave when they're actually looking for property, and it's going to help us to get a better understanding of how to position our property to make sure that we don't have the same sort of thing happen to us when we sell, that we don't reject a great offer when it comes along. In Mr. and Mrs. Seller's instance, unfortunately they didn't understand buyer behaviour, they didn't understand the sales strategy, and it cost them a lot of money. So with us understanding the buyer behaviour, we're going to show you the expensive lessons that they learned to make sure it doesn't happen to you. So let's get straight into the 5 rules of buyer behaviour. Buyer behaviour 1, buyers pick an area first. When a buyer's looking for property, they're too busy these days to be looking at property all over the place. They really make a decision on which suburb they want to live in, and they start looking exclusively in that area. They're looking in the paper, they're looking on the internet, and they pretty much dismiss anything else in other suburbs. Their main focus is that one area. So, question we need to ask ourselves is, are we positioning the property on the market a way in which we're going to attract these buyers looking in our area, but also how are we going to attract buyers looking in other areas as well? Buyer behaviour 2. Buyers don't think a price, they think a price range. When a buyer's looking in the market and they're researching property, they've spoke to their broker's given them an idea as to how much they can look to spend on a property. They don't make a decision, I only want to spend X amount of dollars and nothing below or nothing above. They set themselves a range. So what we need to look at asking ourselves is, how do we make sure that we attract the buyers in this range? But what about the buyers that might be looking in a range a little bit lower or a little bit higher than the range that we've advertised our property at? How do we set a strategy to make sure that we attract all of these buyers? That's going to again give us more inquiry, more inspections on your property. It's going to help us find the ideal buyer for your property. So question 2 we need to ask is, are we positioning the property right to attract the whole market rather than just one isolated part of the market? Buyer behaviour 3, and this is what I think to be probably the most important behaviour out of the 5 behaviours. Buyers, when looking for property, in most instances will spend 10 to even 15% more than what they plan to spend. Now that's what consumers do in general, whether they're buying clothes, jewellery, cars, property, what will happen is that they'll start to look, they'll set themselves a range, like I said in Buy Behaviour 2, a rough range as to what they want to spend. Then they start looking, and what ends up happening is they see something they like, and it becomes a little bit more of an emotional decision around purchasing. They see something valued a little bit more and say, you know what, it's probably worth it, and they justify spending a bit more. Let's use the instance of buying a car. You know, we go out and we might look for, say, a $30,000 to $40,000 new Holden Commodore or Ford Falcon. We decide which model we want, we say, yep, I love it, and then all of a sudden the salesman presents us with the opportunity to be able to get leather interior, 6-stacker CD player, climate control for maybe an extra $3,000 or $4,000, and you think to yourself, you know what, it's worth it. A little bit more money to get something much better quality. Now we've spent 10 to 15% more. When buying property, 10 to 15% more can be hundreds of thousands of dollars. So question number 3 we need to ask ourselves is, with buyers often spending 10 to 15% more than they plan to spend, how do we set a strategy to make sure that when we first start advertising a property, we don't actually dismiss the ideal buyers for the property because they're looking at a market 10 to 15% below where we're positioned? Buy behaviour number 4. Buyers will make their best offer on a property when the property first comes on the market. Now, there's a number of reasons for this. First of all, buyers will often be looking for weeks, months, even years for the right property. They'll miss out on a few, they'll do their research on the market, they'll see everything that's for sale for over a long period of time, and they know what it is that they want. When a property comes on that suits their needs in the area they want, it's in the right price range they think based on the features, location for what they're looking to spend, they'll go and look at that property straight away. They don't want to miss out on it if it suits their needs, so they'll make what they believe to be a good offer on the property as soon as it comes on the market. The other thing, and I mentioned it before, the toy analogy. Whether you've got kids or not, you'll understand what I'm talking about. You'll have a room full of kids, all playing, happy and content. All of a sudden, one of the kids pick up a toy off to the side of the room that none of them had even looked at before. Now what happens? Of course, all the kids want that toy. The same thing applies with property. When the property is first listed on the market, that's when you get the most inquiry and the most inspections on the property. Everybody turns up, they think to themselves, if I like this property, I'm just going to make an offer straight away. What I think is a good offer to try and secure the property straight away. Through fear of loss, they make the good offer, they don't want to miss out. What we need to do, and this is where we look at question number 4, how do we position the property at this most crucial part of the campaign, being the first couple of weeks when we're getting the most inspections on the property, people that are ready to make a decision quick and want to make an offer on the property to secure the property. How do we make sure that we position the property to maximise the sale price based on this initial competition and all the inspections happening on the property? And now the final buy behaviour 5, and that's the longer the property sits on the market, the less someone's going to pay for it. And we all know of this. I used the story just before of Mr. and Mrs. Sellers, a classic example of a property sitting on the market and people end up paying less for it. What ends up happening, and we all know, the property sits there week in, week out, becomes stale. Nobody wants to buy a stale property. The buyer's thoughts are that if the property was a good property, it would have sold in the first few weeks. Maybe it's that it's priced too high, they only want too much, that's why it's not selling. A buyer's not going to want to come along and make an offer on a property if they think that the price that's advertised is too high, because every buyer, of course, wants to feel like they've got a good purchase. The other thing is that the property, of course, has become stale. Now, let's look at bread. We all love bread. What happens after a week, though, of the bread sitting on the shelf? It becomes stale, no one wants to eat it. It's the same thing. We might have a great property with a lot of people interested, but we don't get the result in the first few weeks. What happens? It becomes stale. The other thing buyers think, well, if it hasn't sold when everything else is selling, maybe there's something wrong with it. So at this point, how do we get a sale? Really, there's only one thing that we can do, and that's sell a bargain. And no one wants to have their property sold for a bargain. So question number 5 is, how do we make sure that we achieve a result in the first few weeks when, as I mentioned before, all the interest on the property is in the first few weeks? How do we get that interest, turn it into a good offer and turn it into a sale property? So the last thing that I haven't mentioned yet, but it's the thing that actually ties the 5 buyer behaviours in together, and that's what we call the buyer wave. And that's where we look at the number of inspections versus the days the property is listed on the market. And that's something that I'd love to sit down in person with you all and actually discuss and show you how it ties the 5 buyer behaviours in together. And the other thing that really makes this whole thing work when it comes to selling your property is how we link the 5 buyer behaviours and the buyer wave into the sales strategy, and how we make the whole thing work together. And that's what's going to help you to achieve a premium price on your property and make sure that, again, we make all of these buyer behaviours work in our favour rather than in the buyer's favour. Thanks once again. I hope you found this information informative and helpful, and I look forward to hopefully talking with you soon.